because it's not the only action or the output you're anticipating out of that conversation, but the larger contextual conversation on how it is then going to be perceived, or how is it going to be structured for a larger system, makes a difference, as it's an ecosystem that you're going to influence constantly.
I like that word, ecosystem. That's really interesting. So let me ask you then, when you think about it, so clearly it sounds like the quality of your coworker relationships are really important to helping you achieve your work goals, perform well in your role. When you think about how important coworker relationships are to you on a more personal level, how important would you say those relationships are?
So if I have to take it at a personal level, the mental image of a person that comes to my head when I have to think about calling them or sending them a mail makes a lot of difference personally. So if I have a mental image of a person who is grumpy or, gets your bile going up, I wouldn't want to be reaching out to them. So I will avoid any conversation with them at any given point in time.
Yep.
I think that would be the impact on the official relationship also, where I can keep the emotion aside to some extent, where, I know I have to get a work done, and so I have to have that conversation. But it does make a difference. It doesn't make a difference when the mental image of a person, does it bring a smile on your face or not, does play a role, finally.
Right. Definitely. Okay, so that's good. So the other kind of sort of background that I would like to get to know about you that we haven't talked about yet, because of course this is about cross-cultural relationships. So clearly you are from India.
Yes.
What national cultures would you say that you are that you identify with? Is there anything, any other culture, I should say, besides India that you identify with, or would you distinguish yourself as an Indian person?
I would think I'm Indian. My outlook is very Indian, I would say.
Yeah.
Maybe a little liberal, but yeah, Indian for sure.
Great. And have you spent much time in any other cultures or countries, either with work or growing up?
I have not growing up, but I have worked a lot with Asians. So that is because my primary manager in my last work for a very long period was Chinese. So I have worked a lot with Chinese folks. And then the next is Americans. And the third influence in decision making to some extent is folks from Europe, specifically Czech Republic, because that was another country that I had to work very extensively with. And within the US also, I find a lot of difference in behavior, approach, outlook, response, language, tone in the West Coast versus the East Coast. So that also has been it has made me conscious on, if I know I'm speaking to this side of the world, then I kind of cut my emotions a little further down to not anticipate a particular kind of response.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Are you speaking about, you say you kind of tone your emotions down a bit, and that's specifically with West Coast versus East Coast?
Yes. So when I'm specifically speaking to folks out of Jersey or New York, I have noticed that, a lot of times, like the how you're doing today is just a opening statement. I'm not anticipating them to hear me out. If I was to, I do process that question quite a bit in my head to say, if I was to say, hey, I'm actually feeling very low today, will they stop the work and ask me, why are you feeling low today, Sangeeta? Nobody's going to do that. So you're like, oh, you're just asking for the sake of asking. So I don't even respond to it. And I realize I keep checking that out. So what did they do if I didn't respond? I just smile. And what did they do when I smiled versus I said, good, thank you for asking. I'm like, oh, actually, I'm having an awesome day. Their response doesn't change irrespective of the statement I make. So that means it's just an opener, It's like the Britishers asking, how's the weather? That's about it. So you do not have to necessarily process that too much to be very truthful about answering that. I turn out to be very truthful and involved in the conversation. And then it turns out, oh, they didn't know it. They didn't want it. So you actually wasted their time because they were not interested in the response.
Very interesting. And so it sounds like you've picked up on that that difference, and that's kind of been a sort of a norm established in your relationships that, at least with, folks from New Jersey and New York, that saying how it's going is more like just saying hello than asking the question and expecting a real answer.
Yeah, I find that at Trimble, at least, when people are asking, they do dwell on that for a certain period of time. Actually, that first 2-3 minutes is taken dwelling on that relationship, on how are they doing, and they would open up about their family or what's happened at work or how the weather has changed. So it's not an opener. So what happens? I'm mentally, I'm a very task-oriented person, so I have to necessarily call that out to myself as I do a placement in my head saying, you're going to spend time talking about it. And Sangeeta, be conscious on how much do you want to open up or not open up. Like, do you want to be speaking about your daughters to everybody? Do you want to speak about your family or work relationship to everybody? So what would you say? I have to make a placement in my head to be able to do that, because I realize that in Trimble, people are invested in knowing that, and which makes a lot of difference from my older task-oriented orientation. As most of my leadership was very task-oriented, and the relationships were very superficial that way. So I knew, like, no harm felt in that. I understand that that's all we were, aligned to. That's all the time was available. So people just did that. So I'm also oriented to that.
So it sounds like you've been flexible, even though your preference may be to spend time talking about, the more personal nature of things and really answering that question of how you're doing and things that are going on in your personal life and with your family and that sort of thing.
Yeah, because Indians are very contextual and everybody knows everything or is very inquisitive about everything. So to the extent that I do not want to tell people what's happening in my life, why would you be interested? What is my daughter doing, or how is she studying, and what are her educational preferences are? But everybody wants to give an advice like, yeah, right, I will take all your advice and implement right now. But yeah, we are like that,
Very interesting.
Just natural.
Yeah, and so it sounds it's interesting to me too. So some of the things that I'm just hearing you say is that you're noticing that difference, and you're noticing that your own preference, and how that might be different. But it's very clear in how you're speaking about this that you don't place any judgment, which is a theme that's come out through the interviews too, is noticing cultural differences. And even if your own preference, may contradict those, it doesn't sound like, there's any judgment placed. It sounds like you're just kind of noting what these differences are so that you're able to make that relationship successful. Yeah,
I am a very non-judgmental person by nature, very contradictory to my role. And I think that's also been one of the reasons I've been successful, is because I'm not necessarily judgmental. So I do not put a post-it on everybody's head saying this, they are like this and this is bad about them. So it helps me navigate through and help people out, because only I personally feel when I'm not judgmental and I'm in the conversation, I can actually listen to what they're wanting and be clear on what is possible and not possible, what is achievable and not achievable.
Great. Well, that's really helpful, and that gives me just some good background to help understand, some of your responses and just sort of the context that you operate in within your role and kind of with your background as well. So in this next few minutes, I'd like to focus specifically on some questions related to coworker relationships. And so I do want to clarify two terms, just because those words can mean different things to different people. So first, when I'm talking about intercultural or cross-cultural coworker relationships, intercultural is referring to a coworker you consider to be of a different national culture than you. And the second term is coworker. So this refers to peers who are at about the same level in the organization that you are. So you quite literally work